Racist cop breaks blind black woman's cane in public but has no clue who her son really is. Imagine the hush of dawn in Willow Creek, Alabama, where the world wakes not with a roar but a whisper, the kind that cradles secrets in the curve of the magnolia branches and the soft sigh of Spanish moss draping like forgotten lace for 72-year-old Etta Johnson. These mornings were sacred sacraments, a gentle communion with the paths she'd traced for decades, her white cane, a faithful companion tapping out rhythms of resilience against the cracked sidewalks of her lifelong home blind. Since a childhood fever stole her sight at age 12, Etta moved through life not as a shadow of limitation but as a lighthouse of quiet command, her silver-streaked braids swaying like pendulums of poise, her floral dresses a bloom of unyielding optimism amid the town's fading clapboard houses and blooming camellias. Willow Creek wasn't a place of fanfare, it was a patchwork of porches where elders swapped stories over sweet tea, and children chased fireflies under street lamps that flickered like hesitant stars. Etta's walks to the Central Park weren't errands, they were elegies to endurance, a daily dialogue with the sycamores that lined the trail, their leaves rustling encouragements only. She could decipher the distant hum of the town square's clock tower marking time like a heartbeat she'd long learned to feel, rather than see. Etta's mornings began with the ritual of resolve rising before the roosters stirred her bare feet padding across the worn pine floors of the bungalow she'd shared with her late husband Clarence, a mechanic whose calloused hands had built her a world of wonders from scrap and sweat. The kitchen, sunlit through lace curtains she'd sewn by touch, held the aroma of chicory coffee brewing on the percolator, a pot always ready for drop-in neighbors, or the occasional call from her son Darius, whose voice from Washington carried the cadence of campaigns and compromises. Darius Johnson, at 45, was Willow Creek's quiet pride, a U.S. senator whose rise from local councilman to national voice had been chronicled in glossy magazines, his suits sharp as his speeches on equity and education reform, yet he never forgot the roots that grounded him, phoning Etta weekly to check the garden's yield or the church choir's latest hymn. "Mama, you walking today?" He'd ask his baritone balm across the miles, and she'd reply with a chuckle every day, "Son, legs still work, even if eyes don't." But Etta kept her walks private, a personal pilgrimage where the tap of her cane against gravel was a Morse code of memories. Clarence's laughter echoing in the park's gazebo, their daughter's first steps on this very path before illness claimed her young de base, town's subtle shifts from welcoming waves to wary whispers as Darius's profile rose, stirring envy in some corners. That particular dawn unfolded like so many before the air cooled with the promise of autumn. Etta slipping her shawl over shoulders, still strong from years of tending victory gardens and volunteering at the community center's literacy program. Her cane, a sturdy oak model gifted by Darius after his first Senate win, felt like an extension of her spirit. Smooth grip worn to fit her palm tip, rubberized for the terrain's twists, she stepped onto the porch, locking the door with a keychain of family photos etched in braille, the neighborhood stirring softly, Mr. Wilkins's radio crooning gospel from next door, the distant bark of a neighbor's hound greeting the day. Etta's path wound past the old library where she'd read by listening to audiobooks for the blind across the footbridge over Willow Creek, its waters murmuring like old friends toward the park's central oak, a sentinel under which she'd shared countless picnics and prayers. The walk nourished her, each tap a tally of triumphs over trials, from Clarence's passing to Darius's deployments overseas, her blindness a lens sharpening her other senses, to the town's textures, the rustle of leaves like applause, the scent of baking biscuits from Miss Lula's kitchen, a summons to supper. But midway along the sycamore-lined stretch, harmony halted, the crunch of gravel shifted, deliberate discordant boots not belonging to joggers or groundskeepers. This was different. It was the kind of sound that changed the air, purposeful, heavy, a presence trying to announce itself. Etta paused, her cane hovering, senses sharpening to the silhouette's approach, a presence pressing like an uninvited guest. "Ma'am." The voice grated, gravelly with authority's edge. "Step aside for a moment." Etta turned slightly, her voice a vessel of velvet, courtesy honed by habit. "Morning, officer, just finishing my stroll." "Everything all right? You out here alone?" he asked again, and this time it wasn't a question. It was an accusation dressed as concern. "I know this park like the back of my hand," she answered, still polite, still rooted in that quiet dignity she wore like armor. "Walked it nearly every day for the past 20 years." He let out a low, sharp laugh. Not one of humor, one of disbelief. Well, that might be part of the problem she didn't respond to, that she knew the game, knew how men like this worked, slow erosion, not immediate collapse, disrespect, served in whispers before it shouted. You should really be more careful, he added, stepping closer. World ain't as kind as it used to be. She lifted her chin a fraction number. It's not. There was silence, tense and tight like the moment before thunder, and then, let me see, that for a second before Etta could react. His hand closed around her cane. It was so fast, so unexpected that for a moment she thought she imagined it. But then came the tug. The firm, unyielding pull her fingers resisted, but not enough. The cane slipped from her grip. What are you doing? She asked, panic threading through her voice. Her balance shifted, faltered. She reached out instinctively, her hand searching for something solid in the invisible world around her, and then in a moment that would replay in her mind for weeks to come, she heard it crack, a clean, brutal snap. Her cane, Theodore's cane, the one that had been with her longer than any person still living, was broken in two like a twig under a boot. Silence so loud it rang. She stood there, stunned, her breath caught somewhere between her chest and her throat. The broken halves of her cane hit the ground with a soft final clatter. The officer, badge number 214, according to the nameplate she'd never seen but would soon come to know too. Well, Officer Harlan Brooks tossed the pieces at her feet like trash. Next time, ma'am, don't get smart, he muttered, voice thick with contempt. Some folks might not be as patient as me, and just like that he turned and walked away. Etta didn't move, not at first. She stood in the middle of Willow Creek under a sky too blue for something this cruel. Her shoulders square, her hands shaking, her fingers reached slowly downward, brushing against the splintered wood, one piece still warm from her grip, the other lying half in the grass, exposed like a wound. People were nearby. She could hear them, the whispers, the silence, the discomfort, the complicity. No one said a word. She knelt slowly, painfully, and gathered the remains. Her heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the violation, the humiliation. And yet, she stood. Etta Johnson stood shaking. Yes, but standing, she didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't curse the heavens. She did what she had always done. She walked one foot at a time, step by trembling, step palms out, feeling the air, guiding herself by memory, by faith, by sheer will, past the bench under the oak tree, past the bakery, past the place where someone should have helped but didn't, all the way home. And when she got there, she wrapped the two halves of her cane in an old linen napkin and placed them gently on the kitchen table like a broken heirloom. She sat beside them and waited for the shaking to stop, for her breath to steady, for the weight of what had just happened to settle into the corners of her house like dust. She didn't call anyone, not at first, but she didn't have to. James Monroe, the young man who ran the coffee cart near the bridge, had seen it all. His hands had trembled on the coffee cups. He hadn't intervened. He was 19, scared, and still learning how to carry the weight of being a black man in a white man's world. But he had done something else. He had recorded it quietly, shakily on his phone. He hadn't meant to capture something historic. He just knew what was coming, felt wrong, and he pressed record before Officer Brooks ever opened his mouth. Later that day, when he walked the half-mile to Etta's house and knocked on her door, she didn't say a word. When he held out the phone, he played the video. She listened, every word, every moment, every splintering second of the cane being snapped. When it ended, she closed her eyes. James whispered, "I'm so sorry." She nodded once and said, "It's not your fault." Then, after a long silence, she added softly, "But it is someone's." What neither of them knew, what not even Officer Brooks could have imagined, was that this act, committed with smug impunity under a bright Georgia sky, had just set something powerful in motion. Not rage, not revenge. Reckoning, because Etta Johnson had a son. 3 days had passed since the incident at Willow Creek, and the neighborhood hadn't quite returned to normal. People were talking, but in hushed voices. Some offered Etta sideways glances of pity. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Silence, it turned out, had many shapes. Etta hadn't left the house since her broken cane lay on the mantel, now placed like a relic, half memorial, half warning her son. Darius Johnson still hadn't come home from D.C., though she knew the moment she told him he would. She just hadn't decided if she wanted to light that match yet. But then came the knock. It was firm, purposeful. Etta paused mid-step, one hand on the wall, the other steadying a mug of chamomile tea. She hadn't expected anyone. Another knock, this one louder. She made her way down, door, breath tight in her chest. "Who is it?" She called a woman's voice, answered. Mrs. Johnson, my name is Detective Lena Torres with the Alabama Bureau of Investigation. I'd like to speak with you. May I come in? Etta hesitated. She hadn't called the ABI, had James. She opened the door, a crack enough to see the woman's silhouette, tall, mid-40 seconds, dressed plain but with purpose. A badge hung from a leather necklace around her neck. What's this about? Etta asked. There was a complaint filed about Officer Harlan Brooks. The woman said he's being investigated for excessive use of force, but that's not why I'm here. Etta opened the door a little wider. Then what is? The detective stepped closer, voice lowered. Because you're not the first. Mrs. Johnson, I've got 3 complaints in the last year, same officer, different victims, but none of them stuck. No footage, no witnesses, but now. She gestured subtly toward the house. Now we have you, and I hear there's a video. Etta's breath caught. James. Detective Torres continued, I'm going to be honest with you if you decide to testify. This isn't going to be easy. Officer Brooks is protected. He's got friends in all the right places and enemies in all the wrong ones, but if you're willing, we could bring all of this into the light, not just what happened to you, what's been happening for years. Not because she didn't believe it, but because a part of her had always known that what happened to her wasn't an isolated storm. It was part of a pattern, a weather system that had been raining down for generations. Her fingers tightened on the door knob. Her tea had gone cold. Finally she nodded. I'll do it, she said. Detective Torres didn't smile. She just nodded in return, as if understanding the weight of what had just been set in motion. And in that moment, Etta knew this wasn't just about her anymore. It never had been. The sun over Birmingham didn't seem to shine the same after Darius Johnson saw the video. He had just wrapped up a long day in the Senate office, reviewing a bill on voting rights, when his phone buzzed with a message from a name he didn't know. Jamal Reese. The message was short. You don't know me, but I know your mama. You need to see. This attached was the video. At first, Darius thought it might be a scam, but then he hit play. What he saw turned his blood cold. The image was shaky, captured from behind a coffee cart, but the scene was unmistakable. His mother standing blind, proud, unarmed, and Officer Harlan Brooks looming over her like a storm. The crack of her cane snapping in two was louder than the debates Darius had heard in committee rooms across the country. But worse was the silence that followed, the indifference, the people watching doing nothing. Darius didn't finish the video. He was on the next flight to Birmingham. Back in Willow Creek, streets buzzed with an eerie calm. People went about their business. But the park itself had changed. What once was a place of morning walks and community laughter now felt like a stage where something sacred had been broken at 6:42 a.m. Just as the first morning, joggers passed the bench under the tall oak tree. Darius stepped out of a taxi in front of his mother's house. He didn't knock. He still had a key. Ma. He called gently, the screen door creaking behind him. She was sitting by the window, in her chair, just like always. The cane, what was left of it, lay beside her like a ghost. I knew you'd come, Claudine said softly, not turning to face him. Her voice was calm, but her hands gripped the armrests too tightly. Darius stepped in and took her hand. Why didn't you call me? I didn't want to bring this to your doorstep. You're doing good work up there. You've got a life. You are my life, he said, dropping to one knee beside her chair. You are the reason I do what I do. Claudine smiled, but there was sadness behind it. Then, maybe it's time you did it here. He didn't say anything for a long while. Then quietly, they don't know who you are. They don't care who I am, but they will, he said, rising to his feet. Later that day, Claudine and Darius met with Detective Torres at a quiet booth in a coffee shop just outside of town. James had joined them as well, nervously twisting his baseball cap in his hands. We've got what we need to press charges. Torres began, sliding a manila folder across the table. But we both, you know that with the politics in this town, it might not be enough. That's why your name matters. Darius Malik opened the folder. How? So you're not just a citizen. You're Assistant U.S. Attorney Darius Johnson. You were born here. You built your name on service, truth, and accountability. The moment people realize who Officer Brooks laid hands on, the pressure will shift. I don't want to make this about me, Darius said. It's not, Torres replied, but it is about what your name represents, because in towns like this, names carry history, power, legacy, and sometimes they're the only thing that makes people look up from their silence. Claudine sipped her tea quietly. Your father would have been proud, she said, eyes misting. Darius placed a hand on hers. He always said you were the strongest person he ever knew. I just kept walking, she replied, even when the world wanted me to stop. And now they're walking with you, he said. Claudine nodded. That's the legacy, not what we survive, but what we inspire in a quiet town once too used to looking away. One blind black woman's walk through Willow Creek became the beginning of a reckoning no one saw coming. Claudine Johnson had no intention of becoming a symbol. She simply wanted what everyone deserves: the right to move freely, to exist in peace, to be treated with dignity. But when her cane was snapped in public by a uniformed officer and the world around her stood silent, her pain could have easily disappeared into another forgotten injustice. It didn't, because her son, Darius, refused to let it. What began as one act of humiliation led to something far greater. A community awakened, a system confronted, and a mother's quiet strength shining brighter than ever. Darius's decision to speak out, despite being a former prosecutor and knowing exactly how deep institutional silence can run, was an act of love, but also an act of defiance. He chose truth over comfort, and because of that, others found their courage too, from a coffee vendor who captured the moment to a young mother who spoke up. Despite her fear, people began to reclaim their voices, and in doing so they helped restore the one voice that had been momentarily stripped of power. Her story reminds us that strength doesn't always come wrapped in grand gestures. Sometimes it's in the steady rhythm of footsteps on a sidewalk. Sometimes it's in the quiet resolve not to back down, and sometimes it's in raising a child who knows when to say enough. The lesson: justice doesn't begin in courtrooms. It begins with people, ordinary people, refusing to be invisible. It's in standing by those who've been silenced, challenging the norms that keep systems comfortable, and choosing courage. Even when the room gets quiet, we all have the power to disrupt injustice, not always with noise, but with conviction. So if this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, even just for a moment, we invite you to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support fuels stories that matter. It gives voice to those who've been overlooked and power to those who are ready to rise together. Let's keep walking toward a future where dignity isn't conditional and justice doesn't have to be fought for alone. The circle was complete, but the Serentas revolution was just beginning. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed injustice? Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between staying quiet and speaking up? Share your story with our community. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of how much money they have or what they look like, then this video deserves your support. Hit that like button right now to help this message reach more people who need to hear it. Subscribe to our channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss stories about people who refuse to accept injustice and use their power to create positive change in the world. We are building a community of people who believe that technology should serve justice, not just profit. Share this video with your friends, your family, your coworkers. Post it on your social media. Send it to that person you know who has the power to make a difference but hasn't found the courage to use it yet. Because sometimes all it takes is one story, one example, one person standing up to change everything. The revolution that began with one blind black woman's broken cane didn't end when the officer was suspended. It continued every day in every community where people chose to see what had been hidden, to speak what had been silenced, and to act when action was needed. The story of Etta Johnson became a symbol not just of survival, but of the kind of courage that changes systems, the kind of love that crosses generations, and the kind of justice that starts with a single step, even when the path ahead is dark. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to stop walking. Thank you for joining us on this journey. And we'll see you in the next story, where we'll explore more tales of ordinary people doing extraordinary things to make our world a little more just one step at a time. Chapter 2 casts the spotlight on the summoning of support, where Etta's quiet endurance echoes to her son, Senator Darius Johnson, whose swift return from D.C. stirs a storm of scrutiny, coordinating with Detective Lena Torres on Brooks's pattern of complaints, rallying local leaders for a press event that pierces the town's veil of apathy, and navigating the hearing's heated halls, where evidence eclipses excuses, unlike the atmospheric assault of Chapter 1. This segment surges with strategic solidarity, Darius's deliberative drive drawing in allies from church choirs to civil rights coalitions, transforming personal pain into public pivot as the video virals. Voices from overlooked elders to eager youth, joining the jury like for the layers of legacy lifted. Share the surge of shared stories. Subscribe for sagas of summoning strength. Comment on the complicity in your corner of the world. Sun dipped low over Willow Creek, painting the sycamores in strokes of amber and ash, as Etta's bungalow basked in the afterglow of an afternoon, etched with echoes of the morning's malice. The broken cane halves lay on the mantel, like a diptych of defiance there. Splintered edges softened by the linen cloth she'd draped over them, a makeshift shroud for the dignity desecrated. Etta sat in her rocker, the wood creaking a lullaby of lived longevity, her fingers folding and unfolding a faded handkerchief embroidered with Clarence's initials, the threads a tether to times when trials were tamed with tandem resolved the phone's trill, shattered the serenity Darius's number, lighting the screen like a lighthouse in low tide. Mama. His voice vibrated with the velocity of a veto-overridden Jamal. Sent the clip on my way. Flight lands at dawn. Etta's exhale eased the evening's edge, her reply, a river of restraint. Dawn's fine sun don't dash, Willow's waters run slow, no need to stir the silt. But Darius's dash was decided, his Senate schedule slashed for the sake of the soul who'd shaped the jet's hum, a hymn to homecoming, as he pored over the pixelated proof. The snap, a sound that seared like salt in a fresh wound. Willow Creek welcomed him with the whisper of willows weeping in the wind. His rental car rumbling past the park's plackless paths, the square's silence, a sentinel standing guard over secrets sown deep at the bungalow. Etta enveloped him in an embrace that bridged the park's plaques, the square's silence. Breadth of his broad shoulders, her "you're here," a harbor for his haste. Always, Mama, for you the world's waits. Dawn's light, dawn deliberate. As Darius delved into details over coffee, percolating with purpose, Etta's account. An atlas of the affront, her words weaving the warp of wrong without the weft of wrath. Didn't fight back, knew better, but the snap stayed with me like a song stuck sour. Darius's jaw set like stone sculpted by storms. His notebook a nexus for notes on the narrative, the video a vivid voucher of villainy veiled no more. Won't stay stuck, Mama, we'll sing it straight. The day's design dawned with Detective Lena Torres, a 42-year-old Latina with the lithe vigilance of a vine climbing concrete, her badge a beacon in the bureau's bland halls at the station's side. Room steam rose from styrofoam cups as Lena laid the ledger low. Brooks's got a trail. Senator, 4 complaints in 2 years, all unfounded. Elderly. Black woman last fall. Latino teen before that. Patterns. But no proof till now. Darius's discernment dissected the dossier, his prosecutor's precision pruning the pretext proofs in the pixels, snaps, the smoking gun witnesses. Lena leaned in her ledger, a litany of leads, Jamal's gold, but more. Mrs. Lula from the bakery saw the strut off. Pastor Ellis heard the huff from his pew chains, chaining up the collaboration, coalesced over cornbread at Etta's. Lena's lore of local lapses, a lesson in latency. Darius's drive a dynamo for diligence, not just Brooks' systems, the snare. Oversights overdue. Etta eavesdropped from the kitchen, her embroidery, an emblem of endurance, her chain, the change, a chant for the chorus. Midday morphed to mobilization. Darius drafting a dispatch for the dispatch desk, his Senate stature, a scaffold for spotlight, the press packet, a prism of the prejudice pricked video, vivid victim, voiced villain veiled no more at the community center's creaky stage. Locals lumbered in. Lula with her ledger of loaves, Ellis with his echo of eloquence, youth from the Y with yearnings for yield the room, a repository of resolve ripened by restraint. Darius's delivery dawned, deliberate, his drawl a drawbridge to the divided Willow Creek. We've walked these woods together, but some paths pave pain unchecked. My Mama Etta Johnson, your baker, your bench sitter, your beacon broke, not just Kane but a code of care officer. Harlan Brooks snapped more than wood. He snapped our shared safety. The room rippled with recognition. Lula's amen an anchor, Ellis's echo that an echo of elders echoed. This ain't anomaly, it's algorithm of apathy. 4 files, forgotten folks from fields to families, frayed but footage frees us. Jamal's lens lit the lie, the video veiled no vice. The snap a sonic summons to stand, murmurs morphing to murmurs of might. Mama's metal mirrors ours met. Her stride with spite, but we'll stride with solidarity. Press for probe, petition for process, partner for peace. Pastor Ellis elevated the exhortation, his eloquence, a eulogy to endurance. Etta's walk wove our weave now. Weave wider. Walk with the wounded youth from the Y, yearned with youth's zeal. Jamal's jot, a journal for juniors jotting justice's journey. Miss Etta's etch, our example. Every encounter etches equity elders echoed at the Emporium. Lula's loaves laced with lore, loaves lift when legacies linger. Edda's lift, lights our lane, the park's plaque gleamed under gathering gloam. Edda's path steps of strength, a path paved with petals from parishioners, the sycamores sighing approval. Darius's dashboard dawned with drafts for DC. Dispatches the Senate's suite, a strategy for systemic swells. Torres trailing with tips on trails untrodden trails. Tempt Brooks's kin knit knots, knit them loose with locals looped the night's narrative nested in nuance profound. Edda's evenings embroidered with echoes of empowerment. Her son, you've sown the seeds, a seed of serenity sown the chapters close cradled, a chorus of communal catharsis, the spotlight, a spotlight on solidarity stage profound the narrative's nudge. A nudge to narratives of navigation. Newfound viewers vested in the valor of voices veiled no more. The mobilization, a mobilization of metal mended the story's spark, a spark for stories of summoning strength sown in the soul of shared stands. Profound. The conversation expanded to explore the ripple effects on local leaders, how a single video creates ripples in resource allocation, a ripple that, while brief, can swamp standard support queues. Darius delved into this with a series of examples drawn from anonymized reports, 3 cases where post-incident inquiries not only expedited, but also rerouted funding from routine applicants, leading to overnight shifts for leaders already stretched thin. The screen illustrated the ripple with wave patterns emanating from video points, each wave labeled with downstream delays, a visual metaphor for how one voice can echo across allocations. Edda countered with her own ripple stories. Families fortified, faster lives stabilized her voice, carrying the cadence of countless constituent calls. Torres built on the balance. Mercy's measure matters, but so does the method. When methods multiply exceptions, it measures unevenly for those in the queue. The leader's clip lingered her. A recount of routines disrupted not by malice but by the weight of words from afar, a weight that, while light for the speaker, lands heavy on the handler. The pastor's perspective added layers. His church bent of towns teetering between support and strain. Contributions from afar help, but harmony on the ground heals the pastor's bent, a bent that bent the chamber's bend, turning tension to teachable turns. Edda's reform efforts, a reform reframed as a response to real rifts. Her pushes for funding fairness of funds long lamented. Darius honored the intent. Rifts repaired best when bridged broadly, yet the thread of syndicates to swayed sectors, a thread that tangled aid with advantage. 3 syndicates, a trio of support that supported some swiftly while others waited. Wearily the founder's frankness candid call, a call for candor in channels. Funding's flow fair when followed fully. Edda's least lifted a lift that lit lives, but the chamber's nuance, a nuance of needs, nested the prasses. Guardian's grave, a grave gaze, gauged the broker's bent, a bent broker balancing the reflections, carrying a caring reflections, candid the scars as seen, a seen scars, shared the calls as cried, a cried calls, clarity. Chaos, the poise's principle, a principle poised poise, the charted's change, a change, charted channel, the stirred synthesis, a synthesis stirred souls, the echoed's exchanges, a exchanges echoed empathy, the balanced's breakthroughs, a breakthroughs balanced the real's rhythm, a rhythm real, relational, the call's advance, a advance call collective, the vision's public, a public vision values the lift's legacy, a legacy lift loads the explores emotions, a emotions explore undercurrents, the waits worlds, a worlds, wait, whispers. Chapter 3 illuminates the inevitable ignition where the hearing's heated halls harbor Harlan Brooks's hollow defense against the hall of hard truths. Darius's discerning dissection of the dossier community chorus of corroboration and Edda's composed closing statement yielding to suspension and systemic shifts, the town's transformation from tepid tolerance to tenacious togetherness as a memorial marker marks metal's milestone distinct from the atmospheric assault of Chapter 1 or the strategic summoning of Chapter 2. This finale flourishes in forgiveness's forge, blending Brooks's begrudging bow with broader blooms of belonging. Youth programs, bias workshops, and Edda's enduring walks crafting a coda of communal catharsis that calls viewers to kindle their own candles of courage, like for the light that lingers long, share the legacy of lifted lives. Subscribe for sagas of reckoning. Realized comment on the changes you've championed in your community. The Fulton County Civilian Oversight Board's chamber, a modest room with walls paneled in walnut worn by witnesses' worries, brimmed with a breath-held collective as the hearing hammered home, the air, an alloy of anticipation and ache fluorescent flickers. Casting long shadows on the docket's dance, Harlan Brooks sat straight-laced in a suit starch stiff, his badge banished, but his bravado barely bridled his lawyer, a lean figure leaning into loopholes with the lithe logic of litigation's labyrinth across the aisle. Darius Johnson anchored the array, his attire an armor of authenticity, navy blazer over a crisp shirt. No tie to tether him to pomp, his notebook. A nexus of narratives nested the broken cane's halves in a glass case, a centerpiece of poignant proof. Etta occupied the observer's orbit, her new cane, a companion of confidence, her presence, a pillar of poise that pulled the room toward reflection rather than rageboard. Chair Elena Vasquez, a 58-year-old veteran of verdicts with a voice like velvet over verdigris, convened with calm command. This inquiry into Officer Harlan Brooks's conduct instantiates our mandate to mediate misuse, mindful of metes and bounds. Mr. Johnson, your opening. Darius rose with the rhythm of a river resuming flow, his words as a weave of warmth and weight. Chair Vasquez, esteemed panel, Willow Creek's weave is woven with women like my mama Etta Johnson, elders whose endurance embroiders our everyday. That morning her mobility met malice. Officer Brooks, without warrant or warmth, rested and wrecked her cane, a lifeline laced with legacy. This wasn't whimsy, it was willful, witnessed, yet walled by silence's shroud. The screen surged, the sequence, the snap, a sonic summons that silenced the space, gasps gilding the science. Gallery's gloom. Brooks's barrister bristled his brief. A bulwark of bluster, context commands consideration. My client observed anomalous activity, acted in accord with apprehension protocols. The cane's compromise was collateral, not callous. Darius demurred with discernment. Collateral. Cane's, her compass, her constant compromised in cruelty's clutch. Collateral to no cause but contempt's convenience. Anomalous, a 7-2-year-old's amble ain't anomaly, it's Americana etched in Etta's every excursion. Vasquez vectored to verification, victim's vantage. Etta ascended with an ascent of assurance, her cane a cadence in the quiet. Her voice a vessel of verity veiled in velvet. Chair I walked as always, willows, whispering, welcome wind, weaving my way. Officer approached, abrupt step aside, sans salutation, then seized my support, snapped it swift as spite. Didn't demand, didn't dialogue, just did, discarding the debris like disdains discard witnesses. Watched whirled on. I walked wounded but willed the panel, pondered her poise. A pastor's plea piping up from the pews. Etta's every woman, every elder's echo. This echoes everywhere. Elders erased in every day. Jamal's jot joined his jittery jot, jotting justice's journal. Cartside. I caught the cruelty crunch of cane cups, callous cast-off pressed. Play on principle, not prowess, this town's tapestry. Tears when threads like Etta tangled the testimony's tide. Turned Brooks's bluster buckling under the barrage. His protocol's prerogative, a pretext peeled by precedent. Vasquez voiced the verdict's verge. Prerogative probed pattern persists, 4 files. Frayed folks from fields to families. Frayed by your force footage, freeze the frayed findings. Favor fault, the suspension surged. Like a sentence served. Swift Brooks's badge banished to bench, the board's RS. Bulletin, a beacon of belated balance. Willow Creek woke to whispers wide. The Willow Weekly's front, a front of fortitude, found Kane's crack catalyzes change. Officer ousted. Darius dined with delegates at dusk, dishes of diversity. Dialogue on dignity's dawn. Detective Torres, toasting the tide. Tide turns with testimonies like yours. Town's tapestry tightening. Etta eavesdropped from the edge, her embroidery an emblem of evenings etched with ease. Her tapestry's threads true now, a thread of thanks. Threaded true youth, yearned with zeal at the Wise Youth Forum. Jamal's jot, a journal for juniors, jotting justice's journey. Miss Etta's etch, our example. Every encounter etches equity, elders echoed at the Emporium. Lula's loaves laced with lore, loaves lift when legacies linger. Etta's lift lights our lane, the park's plaque gleamed under gathering gloom. Etta's path, steps of strength, a path paved with petals from parishioners, the sycamores sighing approval. Darius's dashboard dawned with drafts for DC. dispatches the Senate suite a strategy for systemic swells. Torres, trailing with tips on trails untrodden trails tempt Brooks's kin. Knit knots, knit them loose with locals, loop the night's narrative nested in nuance profound. Etta's evenings embroidered with echoes of empowerment. Her son, you've sown the seeds, a seed of serenity, sown the chapters close, cradled a chorus of communal catharsis, a spotlight on the solidarity stage profound, the narrative's nudge, a nudge to narratives of navigation. Newfound viewers, vested in the valor of voices, veiled no more. The mobilization, a mobilization of metal, mended the story's spark. A spark for stories of summoning strength sown in the soul of shared stands. Profound. The conversation expanded to explore the ripple effects on local leaders. How a single video creates ripples in resource allocation, a ripple that, while brief, can swamp standard support queues. Darius delved into this with a series of examples drawn from anonymized reports. 3 cases where post-incident inquiries not only expedited but also rerouted funding from routine applicants, leading to overnight shifts. For leaders already stretched thin, the screen illustrated the ripple with wave patterns emanating from video points. Each wave labeled with downstream delays, a visual metaphor for how one voice can echo across allocations. Etta countered with her own ripple stories. Families fortified faster lives, stabilized her voice, carrying the cadence of countless constituent calls. Torres built on the balance mercies measure matters, but so does the method. When methods multiply exceptions, it measures unevenly for those in the queue. The leader's clip lingered, her recount, a recount. 2 of routines disrupted not by malice but by the weight of words from afar, a weight that, while light for the speaker, lands heavy on the handler. The pastor's perspective added layers. His church bent of towns teetering between support and strain, contributions from afar help. But harmony on the ground heals the pastor's bent. A bent that bent the chamber's bend, turning tension to teachable turns Etta's reform efforts. A reform reframed as a response to real rifts, her pushes for funding, fairness ahead. Fairness of funds long lamented, Darius honored the intent. Rifts repaired best when bridged broadly, yet the thread of syndicates to swayed sectors, a thread that tangled aid with advantage. 3 syndicates, a trio of support that supported some swiftly while others waited. Wearily the founder's frankness, candid call. A call for candor in channels funding's flow fair when followed fully. Etta's least lifted a lift that lit lives, but the chamber's nuance, a nuance of needs, nested the portico looted assation. Guardian's grave, a grave gaze gauged the broker's bent, a bent broker balancing the reflections carrying. A carrying reflections candid. The scars is seen as seen scars shared the coals, cried a cried coals, clarity. Chaos. The poise's principle. A principle poised poise. The charted's